Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network. Groong, I'm Asbed Bedrosyan, together with Hovik Manucharyan. This episode was recorded on April 4, 2023. In this Conversations on Groong episode, we'll be talking about Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow in March and put it in context of China's emergence on the global stage as a major player in the New World Order as it shapes through the war in Ukraine. To talk about this topic, we are joined by Benyamin Poghosyan, who is the chairman of the Yerevan-based think tank Center for Political and Economic Strategic Studies. Hi, Benyamin. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Benjamin.
Hi, Asbed. Hi, Hovik. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, Hovik and I think that you are one of the hardest working people in Armenia. So thank you for fitting us in your schedule.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Okay, let's dig into our topic. More and more in the US, it has become evident that China is emerging on the world stage as a power that is shifting the balance of geopolitical multipolarity. From the recent concerns about TikTok and the US congressional hearings that may lead to its banning from the US, to the economic sanctions on large numbers of products and industries in trade between the US and China, it's obvious that the larger global struggle is no longer between the West and Russia, but rather between the West and China. So in this context, Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow was a major milestone for cementing their partnership. For China, this helps keep the West west of Russia. For Russia, this keeps them economically solvent. So Benjamin, what agreements were signed during the Chinese president's visit to Moscow, and what are the global repercussions of this partnership?
Okay, a lot of documents have been signed, among them two declarations, one in general, China-Russia strategic partnership, and one on economic cooperation with different projects circulated, including the construction of additional gas pipelines from Russia to China, and also cooperation on technology, on food security, etc. I fully agree with you that definitely the key strategic competitor of United States or rival of the United States is not Russia but China, and that this is publicly written in all U.S. national strategic documents starting from Trump era, like National Security Strategy December 2017, National Security Strategy October 2022. Trump administration, Biden administration, it seems that Trump and Biden are very far away from each other, but on China, the language was almost the same. The sole almost or already or almost peer competitor or rival to the United States. However, while speaking about Russia, we see that the collective West is fully behind the United States, and not only collective West, but by telling collective West, I mean also the Asian allies of the United States, for example, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, Australia. I'm not sure that entire Europe is behind and really behind the US in this confrontation with China. Yes, if you hear, for example, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and her speeches, you may say that she is becoming increasingly more and more anti-Chinese. But let's not forget that even Europeans and even Americans are calling Ursula von der Leyen not a president of the European Commission, but American president of the European Commission. While, for example, president of the European Council, Charles Michel, and also heads of individual European countries, they try to pursue balance. For example, German Chancellor Scholz visited China in November 2022. Charles Michel was in China in December 2022. Now Macron will visit China probably this month or May 2023. Also, he stated that probably he will take also Ursula von der Leyen to show that, okay, France somehow takes into account EU position. But again, for me, the primary difference is that while really there is a united collective West against Russia due to the war in Ukraine, I'm not in a position to argue that there is a clear collective West really behind the US in its confrontation with China. And frankly speaking, even if the most terrible scenario happens and there will be some military activities in or around Taiwan, which may result to indirect or direct uh, war between US and China, I don't believe that Europeans will be happily jump into these wars as happily they jumped into to support Ukraine.
How about if we take out Europe from the picture and just consider US, Britain, and Australia? Do you believe there is more unity among those three countries?
I believe yes, even we may add Japan. For example, Japan recently, or in 2022, they adopted a new defense strategy, which was significantly changed Japan posture because after World War II, Japan was significantly restricted in its defense spending. Like even according to constitutions, they have only defense armies. They were not allowed to take part in any international mission, even peacekeeping mission. But now Japan significantly has changed its defense and security policy. There will be multiple increase in defense spending. And for the first time, Japan officially stated and officially wrote in its strategic documents that Taiwan issue is a primary concern for Japan. Of course, we also have to take into account that both China, Japan, China, US, and even China and Taiwan are significant economic partners. Uh, China is a number one trade partner of Taiwan, and they have multi-billion-dollar trade every year. The same is true for China and Japan, and same is true for China and US. Though in recent years, starting from Trump era and continuing by Biden, US makes some efforts to at least partly decouple from China, especially on such spheres, digital technologies, I don't know, this artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, life science, and etc. And also, US is putting much efforts to also somehow change or diversify supply chains, trying to take out some production lines from China and either bring back to the United States. Recently, US Congress approved the so-called CHIP Act, which create much more favorable conditions for companies to invest in the United States, especially in digital technologies, or if it's not possible to bring them in United States, at least to bring them as in other Asian countries, for example, Vietnam, Indonesia, India, or maybe to Mexico. So if you take only the United States, my understanding is that US seeks to decrease this economic interdependence between United States and China, maybe thinking that if at the end of the day the conflict, I mean the hard conflict is inevitable between US and China, either due to Taiwan or some other issues, then it's better to be as economically independent from China as possible. Of course, it will take time, maybe years, maybe one decade, but probably already in 2030, the US-China trade will be much less than, for example, it was in 2020. But this is true for US. Yes, Japan also are making some efforts to diversify its production line and supply chains. For example, a month ago in March, Japan Prime Minister visited India, and he said that okay, Japan is ready to move many, especially high-tech production from China and bring it to India. But the main message also was that okay, Japan hopes that India will be more not only anti-Chinese, because India has a lot of problems with China even without Japan, but also the hint was that, okay, US and Japan are ready to significantly boost India's economic development, especially in digital technologies, if India will pursue more pro-Western and anti-Russian policy. So this also was one of the messages by Japan's prime minister. But India's position, as far as I understand, is very clear that we respect United States. We are a strategic partners with the United States. We would like to continue to be a strategic partner with the United States. We participate in two organizations with US. First is Quad, with US, Australia, Japan, India, and second is I2U2, Israel, India, United States, United Arab Emirates. But despite all of this, and despite the huge respect towards the United States, India was not happy during unipolar world, which emerged after 1991. India was not happy with US absolute hegemony, and India is interested to end the unipolar world, and India is interested to end the unipolar world, but also India has concerns that at the end of the day, China and US can make a new deal and create new bipolarity, like bring the world back into 1946, but simply replace Soviet Union with China. But Indians are telling, okay, guys, yes, we were not happy with unipolar world, with US absolute hegemony, but definitely we are not going to be happy with new bipolar world dominated by US and China when all others, including us, will be forced to make some choices. Indians are telling what we want is a multipolar world, multipolar and multilateral world. By the way, these two terms are not equal. Multipolarity and multilateralism are different things, but Indians are telling we are interested both in multipolar world and in multilateral world. And India says that India in this future multipolar slash multilateral world should be one of the poles, separate poles. Like we don't want to be junior partner of United States, who simply will be used as a stick to punish China. We don't want to be junior partner of China to be used to punish US. And we don't want to be junior partner of Russia theoretically. We believe that India already has amassed such economic power, and especially given Indian economic perspective and the very dynamism of that country, the very positive demography with a lot of young population, etc. Indians are telling, okay, India should be more or less equal player with US, with China, with Russia, potentially with Europe, if Europe finally will decide not to be fully under American control.
So, what is India's role in the New World Order? It's the fifth economic power.
Yes, it's a fifth economic power, and but according to India's calculations, they will become third economic power, by the way, by the nominal GDP. Third economic power no later than 2028. So
Mhm.
Indians are pretty sure that within 4 or 5 years they will pass also Germany and Japan and will become third economy on a nominal GDP. If you take into account GDP based on power purchasing power, India is already on its third country. Number one is China, number two is United States, number third is India. If you compare GDP purchasing power parity. But Indians are sure that no later than 2028, they will become also third country in the world by nominal GDP. So that is why Indians are telling, okay, guys, we don't like when Americans telling us, look, India, I'm interested you to be more developed because I want you to be my leverage and my stick to punch China. They are telling, okay, guys, maybe in 18th century, 19th century, first half of 20th century, when we were colony of the Britain Empire, you could afford yourself to say, okay, we will use you as a stick to punch India, China, Russia, whatever else. Now these times are gone. Forget about that. We are not going to be anyone's stick. We are not going to be used by anyone. We will do whatever we want, and we will do whatever we think is good for India's interests.
Coming back to the summit and trying to evaluate its outcome, people point to the security and energy agreements and arrangements. So in this context, one thing that has sparked our attention is the agreement by China, one of the world's largest technology exporters, and Russia, one of the world's largest energy exporters, to use local currency to denominate contracts. In fact, I think just yesterday there was news that Russia announced that half of the transactions between Russia and China are done in local currency. I don't know if that is based on total volume or total number of transactions or monetary value, but how consequential is this decision in moving away from a dollar-denominated global economic order?
So, first of all, regarding the meeting in Moscow, first, symbolism matters, especially if we speak about China. The visit was very symbolic because let's not forget that President Xi just secured his third term as a president, and this is the first time in 40 years when China abolished the term limits. So, second, this was a visit almost immediately after the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Mr. Putin for alleged war crimes in Ukraine. So this is from symbolic side. It's really very important because in China, symbolism matters. Second, China needs resources. China's economy needs resources. And also China needs resources which can be support avoiding the US control. Because we all know that the US also is a sea power or number one sea power, global power. And always there were concerns in China that at the end of the day, to contain China's development or even to destroy or significantly harm Chinese economy, US may impose a sea blockade on China. There are several so-called bottlenecks, especially Malacca Strait, which, if it's closed, China would face huge problems, not only for exporting its goods, but also to importing so much necessary resources. Its oil, its natural gas, LNG, and a lot of other resources. That is why China now is interesting to have access to resources which can be transported without sea lanes, because China understands that for decades to come, China is not able to compete with a US Navy. That is why Russia is always a choice, because they have a huge border. Plus, there is a Mongolia who is relatively friendly with both Russia and China, located between Russia and China. And also there is a Kazakhstan, which is also friendly to both China and Russia. That is why issue number one for China, to be able to import resources outside seas, outside of US control. Second, looking from Russia's perspective, when the collective West put this huge amount of sanctions on Russia, obviously hoping that it will knock out Russian economy very quickly, it will trigger domestic instability, and then at the end of the day, maybe call a revolution or violent regime change. Until now, this strategy failed. Russian economy is not knocked out, but definitely Russian economy faces problems and will face more and more growing problems. From Russia's perspective, China is a source for money. China is a source for technology. A third important issue, it's a food security. Let's not forget that China has to feed 1,400,000,000 people. And these are people who, due to this fantastic economic growth of China in the last 30, 35 years, hundreds of millions of people, more accurate number is 750 million people. They left poverty, and now their life standard is approximately close or equal to the life standards of people living in Bulgaria and Romania, Eastern European countries who are a member of European Union. But what this standard means? This standard means that you cannot say these people, okay, from now on you again have to eat like 300 grams of rice and 50 grams of bread per day, and this is it.
They've become middle-class people.
Yes, they become middle-class people. Maybe not middle-class in American point of view, but middle-class in Eastern European point of view, which significantly higher than, for example, what these 750 million people were living just 30 years ago. And China needs to satisfy these people's demand, including with relatively high-quality food. It means meat, dairy, etc., etc. And here again, Russia may play a significant role to organize or reorganize its food exports, its wheat, grain, sugar, sunflower oil, and etc., from Western markets to China. So, put it symbolically, we see that both Russia and China being in a confrontation with the West, they are trying somehow to fill each other's gap. Like China is able, or Russia hopes that China will be able to fill the gap emerged in, first of all, in technologies. And by speaking about technologies, it's not only these microprocessors like, I don't know, Intel, Qualcomm, Apple, etc., etc. Technology is everything. Cars, different other machinery, everything is technology, and China now produce almost everything. And in many areas, China now is independent from the West. Yes, maybe China is not able locally to produce these very advanced, 4 nanometer chips, which Qualcomm or Apple is doing through TSMC. But at least China is able to produce 14, 16 nanometer chips completely independent from any Western technologies. While, for example, in Russia, the most advanced Russian factory, which is involved in semiconductor industry, they are able now to produce nanometers chips with 118 nanometers. It's something like Pentium first or Pentium 2, 1996, 1997. You can compare the huge difference. So this is really important. Regarding to ditch dollar from bilateral trade, this is not only the trend between China and Russia. For example, just yesterday, China and Brazil signed an agreement that they are going to abandon US dollar on bilateral trade. And China-Brazil trade is also huge. Brazil is one of the top exporters of meat and other food to China, and China is one of the top exporters of everything to Brazil. Then Saudi Arabia is in negotiations with China to sell its oil to China by yuans, not by US dollars. So we may say that there is some trend outside Western world, including also the countries who are strategic partners or even allies with United States. Okay, if not treaty allies, but both Brazil and Saudi Arabia, they are strategic partners of the United States. But even they are trying to diversify their foreign trade and to trade with other nations, not with the US, but with other nations, dropping US dollar. Why they are doing? I don't believe it's because all are wanting to abolish dollar hegemony or destroy United States. But I believe that US somehow contributed to this because when you are exploiting this role of US dollar as a global reserve currency, you are exploiting it, putting unilateral sanctions or imposing unilateral sanctions on different countries, or threatening with unilateral sanctions, threatening with cutting off from this SWIFT system, this bank transfer messaging system. And then every country understands that, okay, now US has problems with Russia, he is using dollar to punish Russia. Then, for whatever reason, US will have Saudi problem with us. Saudi Arabia is going to use dollar to punish Saudi Arabia.
In fact, I wanted to mention that in US terms, it's more than just exploiting, it's actually weaponizing economic sanctions, economy, and finance. So I think a lot of countries are very wary of that kind of power that the United States has over them.
But the cornerstone of US ability to weaponize economic sanctions or to use economic sanctions, the main pillar of it is the role of US dollar as a global reserve currency.
Yeah.
So that is why many countries outside the Western world, and Western, I mean not only US, Canada, UK, EU, but also the Asian allies, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, they are thinking ways to decrease the US possibility to punish them. So I think that this process will continue. And of course, it's not in like that with several years US dollar will suffer huge losses. But at the end of the day, if this trend will continue, maybe in 10, 15, or 20 years, we will see significantly weakened role of dollar as a global reserve currency.
Okay, you mentioned Saudi Arabia, and that let's turn to another topic that we have been thinking about discussing with you. And, in flexing its emergent powers, China has brokered a couple of important or tried to broker a couple of important agreements between countries. One of them was that when Xi Jinping was in Moscow, he proposed a ceasefire. He again proposed, actually, a ceasefire for Ukraine, which Putin agreed to, he said, if the West would also accept it. So we want to ask about that. And the second one was that China actually brokered a new agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, where the two longtime adversaries agreed to lower the tensions and open embassies within a couple of months from each other. So two questions for you. Let's go 1, 2. What did the proposal about Ukraine bring to the situation in Ukraine? And we'll ask a second one after this.
Okay, regarding Chinese peace proposal, this 12-point peace plan, I believe the key task for China to send a message to all over the world, but especially to the global south, because I believe they understand that their messaging to the US, to the EU or NATO member states, most probably will not receive very well, regardless of the content of the message. But the message to the other part of the world, and most especially to the global south, is this, that, okay, China is a responsible great power which seeks to bring peace and which seeks at least to end the conflict. So, because what is a Chinese cornerstone thinking about Ukraine. Number one, war is terrible, war is tragedy, and war should be stopped. And then Chinese are telling, okay, let's see what we are saying as one of the great powers and what Americans are doing. American position is very clear. To end the war, you need to militarily defeat Russia. To be able to militarily defeat Russia, you should significantly increase weapon supply to Ukraine. You should significantly increase the pace of war. But what are Chinese are telling? They're saying that look, U.S. logic is flawed because according to U.S. logic, to be able to make peace, you should increase the pace of war. Like you need more war to reach the peace. Like, okay, let's have more war, let's have more sophisticated weapons to Ukraine, and hopefully the more war and more deaths fundamentally will bring us to the peace. Chinese are telling, okay, we are absolutely against this strange logic that the path to peace passes through more war. Chinese are telling, okay, let's stop the war now, and let's try to understand what are concerns of different powers. Okay, Ukraine concerns is very clear. They want to restore their territorial integrity. And according to Chinese peace plan, I believe the article number 1 is that territorial integrity of all states should be respected as a principle. But then also Chinese are telling, okay, let's see what are the Russians' concerns. At the end of the day, the Russia's leadership are not simply crazy criminals who are dreaming to destroy all over the world, and that is why they start war, because they are happy to see a lot of their citizens killed and a lot of Ukrainians killed, and etc. Russia also has had and has some legitimate concerns regarding its security. So instead of telling that, okay, peace might be reached only by defeating militarily Russia, which means open-end warfare with terrific consequences, especially for Ukraine, because Ukraine as a state is the number one victim of this, because Ukraine infrastructure is being destroyed and Ukrainians are being killed. The young generation of Ukrainians are being killed. Now even there are calculations that entire generation was lost. And given that even before the February 2020 start of war, Ukraine demography was in terrible situation. Now after this terrible losses, Ukraine is really in a very bad shape. So Chinese are telling, okay, instead of putting more weapons to Ukraine and telling that, okay, this is an open-end war, and this war should continue until strategic defeat of Russia. Well, by the way, no one understands what does it mean, strategic defeat of Russia.
Right.
Even Americans are not telling, like, strategic defeat of Russia, what? It's a regime change. It's a Ukrainian troops restoring their territorial integrity within 1991 border, or Ukrainians are restoring the line of contact which was there on February 23, 2022, or what?
The Ukrainian
like,
army
Chinese
in
are
Moscow.
telling, yes, or Ukrainian army or in Moscow. So Chinese are telling, okay, guys, you are saying that we are for peace, but you are de facto, you are supporting open-end war without even clearly defining the end game, because you are telling strategic defeat of Russia, but even you are not telling what the hell is the strategic defeat of Russia. So the key message of China is that, okay, I am more responsible great power than United States. At least I understand this way.
On the other front, China successfully brokered an agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Generally, the West has relied on the blockage of the Iran-Saudi Arabia relationship to further isolate Iran. So how does this affect the balance of relations in the Middle East, for example, between Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, and Egypt, and Israel, of course?
First of all, this was really Chinese success, because this is the first time when China brokered a deal between two systematic rivals. Well, let's not forget that Iran and Saudi Arabia, they are systematic rivals, geopolitical rivals, and also religious rivals, because Iran are Shia and Saudi Arabia are Sunni, etc., etc. So this is a significant success for China, and this also really message by China that he is becoming more and more important player in the Middle East, and not only in Iran. In March 2021, Iran and China signed 25-year strategic partnership agreement, which envisaged hundreds of billions of dollars Chinese investments in Iran until 2045, 2046. But many experts were telling, okay, it's obvious that Iran is isolated, Iran is under US sanctions, West is putting pressure on Iran, so no surprise that China would able to sign a deal with Iran. These two states, they are both under Western pressure. But now we have Saudi Arabia, which was one of the most significant US allies in the region. So first of all, this sends a clear message that China is becoming more and more influential in the Middle East and in entire Middle East, not only in Iran. Regarding the balance of power is very interesting question because we have a situation when negotiations to restore Iranian nuclear deal, they are in deadlock and apparently they are not going to reach anywhere. Meanwhile, officially Iran accepted that now it enriches uranium up to 60%, while Israelis claim that they are close to the 80-85% enrichment, and any enrichment above 90% is equal to actually move to the creation of first nuclear bomb. This means that theoretically Israel may think about military strikes against Iran, at least justifying it, telling that, okay, I have no other choice than to prevent this. But definitely Iran-Saudi Arabia deal and also negotiations between Iran, Turkey, Syria, and Moscow, because on April 3rd and on April 4th, the deputy ministers of these four countries, Russia, Turkey, Iran, Syria, met in Moscow for the first time. This type of negotiations started to somehow bring an end to the Syrian conflict, or at least somehow bring closer Iranian, Turkish, Syrian, and Russian perspectives how this war can be ended. Both Saudi Arabia-Iran deal facilitated by China and the launch of these multilateral negotiations on the future of Syria without the participation of the United States shows that the US influence in the Middle East is going down. Of course, maybe Americans themselves are not interested to have too much influence in the Middle East because since President Obama era, they were speaking about pivot to Asia, but now they have to make the pivot to Europe because of the Ukraine war. And probably they believe that they are not enabled to make simultaneously three pivots. Again, pivot to Middle East, simultaneously pivot to Europe, and simultaneous pivot to Asia. But in any case, definitely we see growing influence of China in the Middle East. We see that despite the war and Western sanctions, Russia is able to facilitate some significant diplomatic initiatives in the Middle East. And also we see that this will result in decrease of US influence, and potentially I believe this also may decrease the possibility of Israeli strike against Iran, because at the end of the day for Israel, especially after they signed these Abraham Accords with the support of Trump administration, there was a thinking in Israel that they will be able to create the so-called Middle Eastern NATO. There was a lot of discussions during Trump time that we need Middle Eastern NATO, which will unite Israel and Arab states against Iran. But now we see that Iran and Saudi Arabia are on the pace to get to each other understanding. We see that United Arab Emirates are reaching out to Syria. So this whole idea of creating a Middle Eastern NATO led by Israel against Iran, which at the end of the day will result in the multilateral attack against Iran, like Israel plus Saudi Arabia plus Gulf states. This is not going to happen, which itself may stabilize the situation, because if there is no Middle Eastern or regional support to military strike against Iran, maybe Israel will be less inclined to unilaterally make any actions against Iran.
When this deal between China and Iran happened a few years ago, there was a lot of division in what it meant. Some said, oh, it's nothing. It's just like sort of China essentially colonizing Iranian sort of business and basically taking over Iranian business because putting Iran into a lot of debt and Iran doesn't get anything out of it. But, with these new developments in sight, is China's involvement with Iran purely business? we can think of the Brick and Road initiative, for instance, or is it, part of a strategic component which will eventually, maybe also include a military component that is not just sort of weapon sales, but maybe actually trying to exert its force around the region, including maybe the South Caucasus.
I believe that in a strategic level, geopolitics and geoeconomics are intertwined. There is no pure geopolitics without geoeconomics, and there is no pure geoeconomics without geopolitics. So definitely, first of all, Chinese interest in the Middle East, in Iran, are economic because Middle East is one of the primary sources for oil and other exports to China. And this is number one. But it does not mean that Chinese interest is only about geoeconomics because as US-China rivalry grows, China understands that he cannot contain United States, only focusing its attention on South China Sea or its immediate neighborhood. For good or for bad, the US-China rivalry is becoming more and more global. It covers other regions, including Middle East. So definitely, China is also interested to have the geopolitical foot in the Middle East. Regarding the weapons supplies, for example, now Iran supplies weapons to Russia, mostly drones. And just recently, Iran signed a deal with Russia to buy more or less sophisticated Su-35 military jets. And now there are rumors or discussions that maybe Iran also may buy S-400 like Turkey. So I don't exclude that either China may also supply some weapons to Iran, or not to create complications, because if you are trying to mediate a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, the decision to sell weapons to anyone is not the best one. But I believe China can facilitate technological rise of Iran, and not only technology for defense means, but also the so-called dual-use technology. For example, Iran is facing huge problems with oil and gas exploration technology because mostly this technology are Western, and Iran is under Western sanctions for last 44 years, starting from 1979 Islamic Revolution. So probably I believe China will become a new source for Iran for technologies, including technologies for oil and gas exploration, and also including technologies of dual-use technologies. Regarding the South Caucasus, as of now, China is not very active in our region. For example, there are a few Chinese investments in Georgia, up to 500 million US dollars. This is significant amount for Georgia, but it's absolutely nothing for China. And also, China-led Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank provided some loans to Azerbaijan for the construction of Trans-Anatolian Pipeline, TANAP. I believe some $600 million of loan were provided to Azerbaijan to construct Trans-Anatolian Pipeline via Turkey, which is part of Southern Gas Corridor, by which Azerbaijan, starting from 2022, exports some natural gas to Europe. And in Armenia, we know that China mostly provides us with different kind of humanitarian aid, public buses, ambulance buses. We have Confucius Institute, we have Armenia-China Friendship School, and some 20 years ago, we also bought some weapons from China in 1999, early 2000s. But in general, South Caucasus is not, as of now, is not the focus of Chinese interest. But what is interesting is that India also has quite friendly relations with Iran. And it's interesting that Iran is able to pursue both friendship, strategic partnership with India and strategic partnership with China, while China and India are having several problems, including border issues. But both China and India supported Iran's bid to become the full member of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So what does it mean for Armenia if we come back to us? So when Iran will become a full member of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, it means that SCO comes closer to Armenia, because Armenia will have land border with SCO. because we know that we do not have land border with Russia. And because this Shanghai Cooperation Organization, despite that India is there with a strategic partner of the United States, but in any case, it perceived as a grouping of non-Western states who are not anti-Western. Like many states, they don't want, okay, we should destroy United States or we should strategically defeat United States. But a lot of states are telling that, okay, we are fed up with US absolute hegemony. We respect United States, we want to befriend United States, but we don't want that United States have the ability to do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, and wherever it wants. So Iran becoming a member of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Iran having strategic partnership with India, with China, and also deepening its relations with Russia, we may say that somehow some excess of partnership, if not alliance, but at least partnership may appear, which could include Russia in the north, then Armenia, Iran, India, and potentially also China. And here I believe this is from one point of view, this could be a positive, but from another point of view, this could be negative because in this case, Armenia may become another battlefield of not only Russia, US, but let's say these Western and Northwestern powers. And Armenia should do everything first to avoid to become a battlefield, direct or indirect, because this will have catastrophic implications for Armenia. But given Armenia's security challenges, and given the fact that the West is not able to provide security guarantees, and this is very clear that the West is not able to provide real hard security guarantees. I believe that we should be very careful, like not to create perception in this non-Western grouping that we have made our choice to be in the opposite side of barricade. So this requires from Armenia very delicate balancing act because also we should work with the West. EU observer mission is here for 2 years. More and more EU involvement is in the South Caucasus, etc., etc. So really, it's very complicated situation, but it requires delicate diplomacy.
Yeah, sorry, Benjamin. I asked this question to our previous guest too, but maybe I'm missing something. But I see very little that what the West can give, and I see the bilateral relationship between Armenia and Russia in terms of security guarantees is not proving sufficient for Armenia's challenges with regard to Azerbaijan. So does Armenia really have a choice and the luxury to balance different powers? We're seeing, Azerbaijan assert more and more its force, and we're seeing Turkey also sort of supporting that. What is the reason that Armenia should worry about support from the West or not alienating the West? Because in reality, many people would say, and I would say, that without Artsakh, and we're seeing Artsakh fade away in real time, without Artsakh, without the security of Armenia and Artsakh being guaranteed by someone, by some kind of a arrangement, then we have lost everything. We will lose Armenia too. So if this partnership with Iran and India, for instance, was able to offer that kind of guarantee, maybe ditching the West would be the appropriate choice in this case. I'm not sure. What is your opinion on that?
It's very difficult to make any categorical or 100% confirm or sure statement that Armenia should ditch West or should ditch Russia or should ditch anyone. It's really very difficult to say this like with assurances or with confidence.
Just a clarification. I didn't say Russia.
Yeah, no, I'm telling that speaking because there are also a lot of experts who are saying we should ditch CSTO, we should ditch Russia, we should kick out Russians because situation is very complicated. And let us be frank, sitting in Yerevan, at least on expert level, I'm not sure on the state level, but as the expert level, we don't know many things. Yes, we know several things, and we can think or analyze and come to the conclusion about other things. But having a lack of accurate information in the dynamically changed geopolitics around us, and the situation is changing very quickly, to make any confidential statement that, okay, ditching West will not harm us or will harm us, and etc., for me, it's complicated or even impossible. But one thing is clear, that becoming a battlefield for bigger powers, like battlefield between, I don't know, Russia West, Russia US, Russia EU, this definitely will have catastrophic implications for
Yeah,
Armenia.
we
That
will
is, I
not
can
survive that.
say by confidence that I'm not sure if Armenia will say, okay, I'm ditching West and starting to buy drones from Iran. I'm not in a position to say, okay, we should not care because West is doing nothing. So, okay, even if this will significantly negatively impact our relations with US and the EU, they are doing nothing. So let's forget about US and the EU and let's starting to buy weapons from Iran. And in that case, if Azerbaijan attacks Armenia, we will be protected, or Iran will join the war with Azerbaijan, and etc. So all these are very complicated issues to make any confidential claim. But what I can claim confidentially is that if Armenia becomes battlefield between anyone, for example, Azerbaijan, surprisingly for me, it apparently made a choice to become a battlefield between Iran and Israel. I'm not sure why, because it does not sound logical, and frankly speaking, Azerbaijan leadership seems relatively smart person. But apparently, as far as we can understand, Azerbaijan, for whatever reason, made the choice to fully support Israel against Iran. And I'm sure that this is not going to end well for Azerbaijan. So my position is that Armenia should not make such a choices that, okay, let's join US and UK or only US or US and Europe, and let's kick out Russia from South Caucasus because Americans promised us, okay, at least you can live peacefully in these 29,800 square kilometers. This is complete nonsense for me. But also, I cannot argue that, okay, let's say, okay, let's invite Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps into Armenia, create military base in Sunik, hoping that this will deter Azerbaijan, and say, okay, we don't care what West will do because West, in any case, is doing nothing for us. This is also, it's a very complicated, it's very challenging, not complete, very challenging to state this. But what Armenia should avoid, as much as possible, of course, to become a battlefield between anyone. In this case, between Russian West or Russian US.
I agree, Benjamin, with you that it's very difficult. And obviously, when I said, ditching the US, that is a very simplistic statement. And I think also saying that Armenia would for sure become a battlefield with any cooperation deal with Iran would also be a little bit extreme. So maybe there is some kind of a balance that can be found, and I don't know what that balance is, but we will continue talking about this in the future. I guess we'll have many opportunities to continue this discussion.
What may I say? I believe the primary attention of Armenia now is to save Nagorno-Karabakh because situations there is very dangerous, very, very challenging, and we are very close to the point of no return. Actually, we may be already only one step before the point of no return. And for one thing, I'm sure that if no Armenians remain in Nagorno-Karabakh, or only few thousand Armenians remain in Nagorno-Karabakh, this definitely, definitely will have catastrophic consequences for Armenia's security. But we are very close to that outcome, unfortunately. So I believe what Armenian government and Armenian society or expert community or diaspora or whoever has any concerns or interest in Armenia should do, at least they start to think how not to make this last step because we are very close to the situation of no point of no return regarding the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh. And if we will pass this point, and again, maybe we are only one small step before passing or crossing this line, it will have catastrophic implications for Armenia's security.
That's an important point to ponder, and we will do so until our next discussion on this topic. Thank you, Benjamin, again, and we hope that our listeners found this discussion enjoyable and important.
Thank you, Benjamin.
Thank you, Aspet. Thank you, Hobby. As I said, it's always a pleasure to be with you, and thanks for all your efforts to bring this English language content to both diaspora and also outside Armenian diaspora.
That concludes this Conversations on Groong episode, and we hope you found it useful. As always, we invite your feedback. You can find us on most social media and podcast platforms or our website, groong.org. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on YouTube, like our pages, and follow us on social media. On behalf of everyone in this episode, we wish you a good week. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.